Good evening. My name is Ian Walsh-Riley, and I am the president of the Metropolitan Republican Club. I'm delighted to welcome you to our 20th webinar episode. As a reminder, we have a donation link in the live chat. We hope you will consider making a donation to help support the club during the 2020 election cycle. We are so excited to have with us tonight as our guest, Steve Bannon. But first, a wonderful surprise. Here to introduce Mr. Bannon, the former global editor-in-chief of Human Events and the current host of War Room Pandemic, everyone's favorite Briton, the one and only Raheem Kassam.
Thank you. I like to think of third or fourth favorite Briton at least. I mean, you've got Nigel Farage, you've got Winston Churchill, you've got Margaret Thatcher. I'll take fourth place. How about that? Ian and Krisha, thank you so much for having me. The whole club, thank you so much for having me. I've just shared this out with my pages as well. So hello if you're joining from the National Pulse page or the Raheem Kassam page on Facebook as well. You know, these guys are doing such an amazing job. Make sure you support them. You like the New York Metropolitan Club and all their efforts. And if you can, if you're eligible, donate to their causes and everything they're doing. I was thinking about it just the other night when I was, we were surrounded by so many younger people, and I'm getting to that age now where I think I am allowed to say younger people and mean it. And it was just so incredible to see so many people coming up and saying, hey, we listen to War Room, we listen to the podcast, we act on it every single day. And sometimes it just sort of feels like you're talking to the same people that you've been talking to for the last nearly 20 years or however long we've been doing this. But it is so amazing the work you guys are doing, and I'm very appreciative for it. I'm very appreciative of being here with you. Feel free to jump in and cut me off whenever I go too long, because I love the sound of my voice more than Americans do, if you can believe in such a thing. So I do love to talk. But I do want to talk to you today about something. I'm usually a little bit more light-hearted, but I do want to talk to you today about something that is deadly serious, which is the plot to steal this election from what I believe will be your rightful president after November the 3rd. Now, it was about 6 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more, 7 weeks ago, that I first came across a group called the Transition Integrity Project. They had been featured in the Atlantic magazine and the New York Times and a few others. Not much fanfare about them, but a little bit, and you could tell what they were trying to do, what the establishment media was trying to do. It was a classic tactic, a tactic that I had witnessed so many times in the past over the course of the Brexit vote and what we were trying to do in leaving the European Union. We're still waiting for that moment, by the way, supposedly going to happen at the end of this year. But I was very familiar with the tactic. The tactic was to give this nobody group that came out of nowhere the credibility of the New York Times and the Atlantic and other outlets that had written about them, to say, hey, these guys are reputable, bipartisan, non-partisan, free and independent thinkers. And on November the 4th, they're going to tell you that Trump's not the legitimate president. Okay, well, from the outset, the skeptical-minded amongst us will recognize what's going on here. But there aren't, I'm afraid, without dinging, my colleagues in conservative media too much, there aren't many people who would bother to go and find out who exactly the Transition Integrity Project are. And I am nerdy enough to spend some time going through their financial filings, going through all their websites, going through all of their documents, and reading them line by line, highlighting them line by line. And I have my props if I need them at any point. I always carry my bag full of props. And one of them is the Transition Integrity Report, as I first downloaded it almost 2 months ago, with all my annotations in it. Now, since then, I think a lot more people have heard about this organization through the War Room and the National Pulse and other organizations as well. Other right-wing media organizations have picked up on this and are running with the story. The reason it occurred to me as being so destructive to the idea of the Republic as you all know it was that it established via primary, secondary, and tertiary mechanisms what I would call nothing less than European social democracy as its key end goal at the end of all of these papers. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, we all know what that means in a political philosophy sense, but do we know what it means in a bureaucratic sense? Probably not. I think a lot of people would be stunned to realize just how much of British primary legislation was coming out of the European Commission by the time we voted to leave the European Union in 2016. It was about 70 to 80% of British law coming from a foreign capital with a foreign body with very little, if any, British representation going on there. Now, after the Brexit vote, we were inundated by very much the same things that you're inundated by over here in the United States. The Russians helped you. Putin's your best mate. You must be filthy rich because, you know, millions of dollars are being funneled into your bank accounts by Russian oligarchs at this, you know, anti-Semitic, black-hating, Jew-hating, gay-hating, whatever it is, right? The pejoratives are manifold. The reality was very similar to the Trump campaign. I mean, we couldn't collude with our own campaign in Grimsby from London, let alone collude with the Russians. Very much the same way Steve Bannon will tell you that they couldn't collude with their own Maryland operation, let alone collude with Moscow. We did it fairly, we did it squarely, and we did it off the backs of our own deplorables in the United Kingdom. But after the Brexit result, there was a very clear legal battle that was defined by people like Gina Miller, Gina Miller. If you want to go and look her up, you know, it'll teach you a lot about what happened in those 4 years. Gina Miller undertook a lawfare campaign to undermine the Brexit result, and it has dragged us on 5 years since, nearly 5 years since the result of that Brexit referendum. And you know, what did that entail specifically? It entailed the courts. Of course, it will entail the courts, just as your post-November the 3rd results will entail the courts. But it also entailed a little body called the Electoral Commission. Well, if you read the Transition Integrity Reports document and you read all of their recommendations, you'll soon find out that they are recommending an electoral commission for the United States. What's that? Well, Ed Foley makes it very clear in his book, Ballot Battles, which is one of the documents that the Transition Integrity Project relies on for its legitimacy. Now, Ballot Battles is an incredibly neoliberal, hardline, middle of the road, institutions are better than the American people type of document. And what it effectively comes down to is that they want to take the power away from the people. They want to take the power away from the politicians, the elected politicians, and say, no, we need a bureaucratic institution that rules as to whether or not election results are valid. And to me, and you'll hear from Steve in just a moment about what he thinks, but to me, that's the steal. That's the way they're going to go about this, through the courts and through a bureaucratic mechanism between November the 3rd, because as sure as night follows day, I do believe that President Trump will win in a landslide victory, by the way, on the night of the November the 3rd election. But between the mail-in ballots and everything else, the chicanery that they have in place, they will use Edward Foley's mantra, which is to say, actually, we can't decide, the House shouldn't decide, the American people couldn't decide, we're going to need a bureaucratic electoral commission to decide. And on that note, I will take questions if we have time for any questions. It's a very simple and short synopsis about my thesis on this. And if you want to follow more, make sure you're following War Room Pandemic. Make sure you're following National Pulse. We build on this every single day. But in brief, that's it. And I'll hand it back over to you guys.
Thank you so much for that. And we can't thank you enough for everything that you just said and informed us about. Love the Grand Union flag behind you. It's wonderful. And speaking of Britain and the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, all of us are very concerned about how everyone in Great Britain is doing through the pandemic. We know that they want to shut things down. They're saying that the pandemic, the COVID-19 is on fire again in Great Britain. You have to shelter in place. What do you think? How is Prime Minister Johnson handling things?
Well, Prime Minister Johnson's handling things much in the way that I predicted Prime Minister Johnson would handle anything, which is terribly. I tried to warn people 2 years ago that Johnson was not the populist he claimed to be. He saw a means by which to grasp power, and he grabbed it with both hands. And credit to the politician that is able to do that, but more fool us as the public who's willing to vote for that. Now, Boris Johnson obviously has gone through some difficult times in and of himself, and I'm not criticizing him for getting sick and being sick with this, what is effectively a Chinese Communist Party virus. I wish we wouldn't say COVID-19. I wish we wouldn't say coronavirus. This is a virus that's come straight out of the Chinese Communist Party. Whether it was natural or man-made, they neglected to inform the world of what could be done to stop this thing spreading. And so this is on them. And Boris Johnson's been so scared of upsetting the Chinese Communist Party that he hasn't been willing to look them in the face and say, right, well, not only do you owe us, whatever you want to call it, reparations, or help the world out, or give us the original code, the genome of the virus, whatever it is, but he's also been incredibly bad at leading the nation through this. Now, for those that you don't know, the pubs being open in Britain is pretty much the same thing as the flag flying in America. I.e., if you close the pubs, you might as well be burning the flags at that point. They are the places that we have communal discourse within our communities, in our streets, in our towns, in our cities. They're the places that we come together and argue the points out. My old boss Nigel Farage used to say every pub's a parliament, i.e. that you debate the issues of the day out at the pub, preferably after 4 or 5 pints. And Boris Johnson's approach to this pandemic seems to have been just cower at every juncture. Close the pubs, close the restaurants, don't allow people to congregate together, and so on and so forth. So he's been a remarkable failure throughout this whole thing. He's listening to these bureaucratic virologists who clearly have been proven wrong from the get-go. And my worry is that Britain, much like many parts of America, are now fed up of this, and we're going to see mass civil unrest as a result of it. Now, I want to take the opportunity, because I see that our main speaker is ready here. So I want to take the opportunity to introduce somebody who is just an incredible friend of mine, an incredible thinker, somebody who has fired me more times than he's been divorced, and that's a lot. He's a great man, just a father figure to me. I think you should take everything he says just incredibly seriously and ruminate on every point. And I want to introduce you, I'm proud to introduce you to our main speaker of the night, Stephen K. Bannon. I'll hand it over back to you, Ian.
Thank you. Are you ready with Steve?
Right here, ready to go.
Wonderful.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so honored to be here.
Krisha?
Well, it's been really wonderful, Raheem, for that great intro. And for those of you who just joined, welcome to the Metropolitan Republican Club's webinar series. My name is Krisha Lenzo, and tonight it is a great honor and privilege to welcome Steve Bannon. So let's jump right in. Now that the election is 40 days away, it's looking more and more possible that the Democrats are going to do everything in their power to try to steal it, as Raheem just mentioned. So Steve Bannon, can you please explain to us some of the biggest threats you're seeing right now that we're currently facing as the election day draws near?
Look, I'm really honored to be here with the club tonight. And I want to say that Raheem has done such an amazing job with his new site, National Pulse, to break the story in this. We've been following this for a couple of months. Let's go back in time. We started War Room Pandemic because of our relationship with Miles Guo, GTV, G News, these people that are really expatriates from China that understand what the CCP is trying to do to the world, and particularly the United States. We were doing broadcasts with them in mid-January for Lunar New Year when they told us, hey, there's a massive SARS outbreak that's starting, and it's going to shut down basically central China and probably all China. We started War Room Pandemic a couple of days later. It could kind of replace our show War Room Impeachment. And so we became experts in this pandemic. And one of the things we noticed as we got into the spring was this, and we covered the pandemic both as a serious topic, a bioweapon from the Chinese Communist Party. Also, we have a lot of people say, on the show, they say it's a hoax, all that. But we try to cover both in a very reasonable sense. But there's a big group of us that take this very seriously. We noticed in the spring that the progressive left media and the Democratic Party had done such a job of really not looking at the evidence, not looking at the data, that they had really started to traumatize their base, and that they had started to kind of this, what I call mass hysteria, that I was noticing in primaries that Democrats were not voting. One of the things we focused on was the New York primary, run by the Democrats, where In Brooklyn, I think 80% of the votes were by mail, and 30% of those turned out to be they could never be certified. The same in Manhattan, I think 20%. And it dawned on me at the time, and I started talking to Raheem and other lawyers, that we were going to have a very different election this time, that the mass hysteria, the traumatized base of the Democratic Party would actually make it impossible for them to beat Donald Trump on Election Day. And what they were going to try to do is come up with some sort of scheme to essentially take the election from Trump post-voting day. Now, it turns out Raheem, through his investigative reporting, found this thing called the Transition Integrity Project. And there they put it up in broad daylight, where it's kind of a 3-column convergence on Election Day. One is lawfare, where they get the best attorneys they have, headed by Eric Holder. Perkins Coie is the law firm. They've got solicitor generals, former U.S. attorneys, 800 attorneys that have already filed 200 lawsuits in states, and particularly battleground states, to basically change election law. And you've seen this. We saw 60 Minutes on Saturday, whether it's Pennsylvania, where you don't really need a marking on your ballot, all the way that you count 14 days later, you count 3 days later. It changes everywhere, but basically to make it so that they can start to vote by the pound. The second part is really, and we're right here on Central Park South and Fifth Avenue. In a few minutes, they just put out a police alert. Black Lives Matter is about to have a protest because of the situation in Kentucky. And so what they're going to do is have basically street protests with Antifa, the radicalized elements of Black Lives Matter, and others to basically take the streets in Washington. And in others, in fact, they say in this report, they will actually have to bring it to a street fight. The third element, and the most powerful, is both the mainstream media and the oligarchs in Silicon Valley with social media. They intend to have Twitter and Facebook and Google, YouTube, all of this to be never declare Trump the president on election night, and just continue to go on and have election week and then election month, and to try to push through, if they don't get the vote they want in these battleground states, to push through the safe harbor on December 8th and to go through the Electoral College on the 14th and essentially pitch it to Nancy Pelosi's House of Representatives when the new Congress meets on the 6th of January. So the key here is one of the things we've been focused on now. We've had Bill McGinley and Jim Schultz, and many of the top lawyers in the country. But Raheem at the National Pulse and the War Room is to really start to galvanize people to say, hey, look, you got to get out the vote. You've got to vote on Election Day. But there's essentially going to be the equivalent of a civil war starting on the night, late in the evening on the 3rd, when they refuse to declare Trump the president. And one that tells us Hillary Clinton coming out the other day and saying, under no circumstances can Joe Biden concede. So what they're going to try to do is every element of lawfare, every element of street violence, every element of civil disobedience, every element of using mainstream media, and most importantly, as Miles Guo says, the Chinese Communist Party says, the most powerful weapon they have is social media. And to use social media to essentially browbeat the Trump movement and the Republican Party into accepting an illegitimate and unelected group led by Joe Biden that they hope takes the oath of office at noon on the 20th of January. Now, what we're doing, we're saying, hey, look, the left brings us all on themselves. This is not the number one reason, I'm glad President Trump said it this morning, that we need to get a 9th justice on the Supreme Court immediately. It is the Democrats that have forced this kind of phony vote. When I talk, and the scale of it is 60 to 80 million ballots. So let me repeat that, 60 to 80 million ballots right now. 69% of the Democratic Party are telling pollsters they are not going to go to a polling place and vote. They're going to vote by mail. So that's going to lead to about 60 to 80 million. Right now, with the logistics we have at the different, forget the post office, the logistics we have actually to open envelopes, to check signatures, to check mailing addresses, and to actually count that vote. We will be counting the vote through December. You know, one of the things about, if you go back and look at the Transition Integrity Project, and I recommend everybody go to the National Pulse and read Raheem Kassam and Natalie Winter's annotated copy of this report. It's 22 pages, but they put all the references in. They basically run 4 scenarios. The 4 scenarios is Biden wins election night, and so that's fine, Biden wins. The other 3 is Biden barely wins, it's questionable like 2000, or Trump's up on election night. In all three of those scenarios, within 3 or 4 weeks, Biden has won because of the count of these mail-in ballots. Bloomberg, being, I think, one of the smartest guys in the room for the Democrats, realized there was a big problem. And here's the problem. It's the state of Florida. So immediately he got his data group, Hawkfish, to get to Axios and go on HBO, the Axios show 2 Sundays ago, and say, hey, the Transition Integrity Project left out one scenario. That's scenario number 5. And in that scenario, Donald J. Trump is up at 11 o'clock on the 3rd of November at 11 p.m. He has 404 electoral votes to, I think, 111. And they said within 72 hours to 2 weeks, Joe Biden will be at 280 votes and will be president of the United States. That's the 5th scenario. That Trump can even be winning in a landslide, and they still will get it with these mail-in ballots. Bloomberg immediately knew they had a problem, and that problem is the state of Florida. And what they did, that $100 million commitment you saw basically a week ago, was to infuse that cash in the ground game and advertising and other elements to ensure that Trump is not leading in Florida on the day of vote on November 3rd. They're so panicked that you saw a couple of days ago, they added another $16 million basically to pay off all the fees and debts of the felons, so the felons can then be free to vote. Of course, Matt Gaetz, the great congressman, the firebrand from Florida, immediately brought this up the other night on TV. He came on our show today. He was hammering for 20 minutes, saying that the Attorney General of the state of Florida had to commence a criminal investigation. And I'm glad to report at early this afternoon they did. So here's what we need to do. There's a couple of things. Number one, I think the club needs to be pushing out every piece of media about this. Every day in the war room, we do an hour or so on this in our 2-hour show. National Pulse, but you got other sites. Byron York did a great piece. A lot of the conservative media, Gateway Pundit, others are starting to pick this up. There's a great piece in the Atlantic tonight. It's the Mac Daddy on Drudge. If you've gone to Drudge in the last couple of hours, it's a very detailed analysis how they're blaming it on us now. They're blaming it really on Trump, is the guy that's going to try to use all this legal warfare to try to do something unconstitutional. It's not driven by them. But all these stories you should be reading and getting out to your colleagues throughout the country. That's number one. Number two, anything you can do throughout the rest of the country, particularly the battleground states, to help the local Republican Party, to help the local candidates, to help the Trump campaign on get out the vote. Remember, the key for us is on game day, November 3rd, that we win game day and we win it big. If we set the predicate, and they know this, if we set the predicate on that day that Trump's the winner and Trump's a big winner, it's going to be very tough. Not impossible, but very tough, or make it tougher for them to try to unwind that. Last but not least, it's for you to volunteer. The reason we're talking to the New York clubs immediately, because you guys are the cutting edge, you're the leaders, you're the intellectual leaders. We need you guys to help people sign up as election officials in these states. If you're lawyers, we need you to volunteer for the Lawyers for Trump. If you're not lawyers, we need you to figure out how you can be election officials. You're going to need tough people in the room. As these 60 to 80 million ballots are being counted, we need the toughest, smartest people in the room, not as poll watchers. We need that too. But what we need is people as election officials, which you can sign up for, to basically sit there and contest every ballot. Last but not least, you have to be getting on social media and look at all those alternatives of social media and start to work networks today. The reason why, they have every intention of putting maximum pressure on Fox. But more importantly, they're going to be ripping down Facebook. They're going to be ripping down Twitter. They're going to be making it very difficult for conservatives to communicate. Let me give you a very specific example. Something's happened over the last couple of days. Dr. Lee Ming-Yan, that we've had on our show many, many times, in fact, pretty open, that we've had her, we helped her defect from Hong Kong. She went on Tucker Carlson the other night to really the first time to go on mainstream media in prime time and tell her story about her report that shows that this thing came from the P4 lab in Wuhan, and the Chinese Communist Party's been lying about it from day one. She started a Twitter account on Monday. She had 59,000 followers by that evening. Twitter ripped it down and saying everything she's saying is false information, but never gave her any chance to kind of refute that. She goes on Tucker Carlson. He has one of the biggest shows he's had this year. In addition, he puts it up on Facebook, which internationally he's never had that big a show. The show explodes because all of Asia knows this woman is a very highly placed virologist that works in the Hong Kong lab. The show's exploding. Facebook takes it down. It just says, hey, you don't have the information. Last night, she goes on one of the biggest channels in India. This channel, WYION, is renowned for taking on the Chinese Communist Party. They put her her interview up on YouTube. It's immediately taken down. That is just a foretaste, a forerunner of what's going to happen to Trump supporters around November 3rd. You're going to have your Twitter accounts taken down. You're going to be blocked. You're going to say you're putting out false information. They're already, the Biden administration or the Biden campaign is already meeting with media, with the mainstream media companies to say you cannot say that Donald Trump's winning or has really won the presidency on the evening of November 3rd. So look, this is going to be one of the greatest fights in American history, okay? It's already out there. It's been exposed now. We have all the information we need to know. People are wargaming this nonstop. We need leaders like yourself to step up here and to put your shoulder to the wheel. Because I got to tell you, we can win on November 3rd, and they have no intention of allowing Donald Trump to actually take the oath of office at noon on the 20th of January. And if we lose this one, we're going to lose this. We're going to lose the republic we know. We'll still be a country. We just won't be the republic we know. And if you look at who's stacked against us, the progressive left, the Wall Street faction, the global corporatists, the Chinese Communist Party, which is, remember, they're in back of BLM, they're in the back of Antifa. Their hands are everywhere in this. So this is the way that our enemies take us down. And I got to tell you, we now know what they're going to do, and this is up to us to fight this. And I like our odds because I like our people outside the football, and I particularly like the fact that Donald J. Trump is not a person that backs down. So if you have questions, we're up on the site every day on pandemic. I know it's kind of late, but Raheem's National Pulse has a show at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They also have Cutting Edge Reporting. Go to Gateway Pundit. Go to Revolvers, an amazing new site. Start going to these new anti-drug sites. You're going to see tons of information, but start putting together your own networks of how to communicate right with each other and just keep the faith. But this thing's, we're hurtling towards I think a big collision here, and we got to win this. It can be no other way. We're going to win the game day vote. We have to make sure that we win the fact that Donald Trump gets inaugurated.
Well, and I think you've hit the nail on the head because they've telegraphed what they're going to do. They keep saying that he will not, no matter what happens, the president will not leave the White House, right? He'll just hunker down and deny the reality that he lost. But in reality, they will deny the results of the American people's votes, and they will try to get rid of it. But I'd like to to go on to a question about social media, which we were touching on. Twitter's director of public policy just left to go to the Biden campaign, the transition team. What about some of the other major tech giants like Google and Facebook? How do we confront them?
Okay,
because
here's what I think we have to do. Number one, I think the RNC, I think Ronald McDaniel's done a great job. I think the RNC tomorrow has to go to the FEC and has to sue these companies for collusion. The media companies, and particularly social media. Look, one of the most powerful things I've heard is Miles Guo, who knows China better than anybody. He said the number one weapon they have is not their nuclear arsenal, not their military arsenal, not their economy, not their currency, not even their biological weapons. The number one weapon they have is social media, TikTok, WeChat, all that. And he said, hey, they're in business with Google, they're in business with Twitter, they're in business with Facebook, all of these guys. And these guys are going to be used to tear down so that you can't have any communication. I think we have to take a much harder stance. I think this actually institutionally. I think the RNC's got to get involved here, sue these guys for collusion. I also think if we have lawyers I think we need shareholder suits. I think we need class action suits. I think we got to bring them up like in the next 10 days or 2 weeks to the Senate, which we control, put them on in front of the nation and grill them. Okay. We don't have time for antitrust and to make them public utilities, all things I think have to happen. That's going to happen over time. This is an emergency, and we have to treat it like an emergency. And Raheem's done amazing reporting. Not only a lot of these guys, go to work for the Biden administration. Most of them go to lobbying firms to lobby for the Chinese Communist Party because the CCP is paying top dollar. So the CCP is everywhere in this. They're involved with the social media companies up to their eyeballs. Those social media companies will always, their default position is always take the position of the CCP. Remember, one of the things we're fighting here is the progressive left, the Wall Street faction, the corporatists. They like the Chinese Communist Party model. They think what we've got with the deplorables and this kind of populism and this economic nationalism is just way too shabby, right? We can't handle a pandemic. We can't make big decisions. The holy trinity of the progressive left now is three things. Number one, take down the patriarchy. Number two, destroy the systemic racism of America. America's systemically racist and evil. That's got to be destroyed. And the third, the high theology, the high church of this movement is Gaia or the earth. So you got to have everything with climate change, right? Which is kind of, pre-Judeo-Christian West paganism. So that Holy Trinity gives them moral justification. They kind of do away with democracy and do away with our republic. They like the model. If you listen to Tom Friedman, he kind of tears up when he says, oh, these guys can do so much. They can build infrastructure. They can get rid of the pandemic. They like their model. They don't want the total model of the CCP, but they want a derivation of it. And the one that they want is to have some version of state capitalism combined with more authoritarian kind of dictatorship. So that's what we're fighting. In social media, I think it's now, we gotta break the glass, and I think the RNC's got to go into FEC and start suing. And I think we need class action suits. I think we need shareholder suits.
Well, before we go on, Krista, I just want to let you guys know that Raheem has informed me that he actually didn't pay you, Steve, for these plugs.
Raheem, for once in his life, is actually working hard, so I thought he was some kind words.
So in terms of some breaking news, we'd love to hear your take. Now that President Trump should be announcing his pick for Supreme Court this Saturday, and we have potentially the number of senators to approve it, how do you think this will affect the election and the election cycle?
It's going to be everything. First of all, we need a ninth justice. It can't be 4-4. We need a ninth justice now. The Democrats and the progressive left have forced us on it. Look, they've already got 200 suits. If you read all the articles, look at the analysis, talk to some lawyer, there are going to be thousands of lawsuits. Let's go back to 2000. In 2000, we locked the country up to right before the 14th of December when the Electoral College meets, when the Supreme Court had to stop it, right? That was over, I think, something like 5 precincts in one county. In Broward County, it was 5 precincts. It was a couple of hundred votes. That's what it all came down to. Remember, you're talking about 60 to 80 million ballots here. You're talking about anywhere from 6 battleground states to maybe 10 or 11, maybe even 12, okay? You're talking about thousands and thousands of polling places. The lawsuits are going to boggle people's imagination, right? Go back and read the New York Times from a couple of weeks ago when they say they set up a war room run by Eric Holder and the guys at Perkins Coie. They have 800 of the toughest election lawyers, and they've already war gamed this out, right, about what they're going to do. So the Supreme Court, and this is why I've been arguing, I don't think they ought to have a committee meeting. I think Grassley should step aside. Let's nominate it on Saturday. Go to the Senate floor. Let's debate it there and then vote, and let's get on it. I think the next justice needs to be there as close to the opening of the Supreme Court as possible, just to handle the election lawsuits, because this is going to be one of the most complicated things in American history. The law that really settled the election of 1876 and the next couple were all hotly contested, right? And 1876 was kind of like this, that the law itself has never really been tested. It's a little shaky. So you're going to have some really monumental historic calls made by the Supreme Court. We need a justice, and it's because the Democrats have forced this. We need a justice now.
I'd love to know why, in your opinion, Mitt Romney decided to throw in the towel right away and leave the news cycle. I mean, normally he would be trying to eat up the time, castigate the president. Why did he throw in the towel and say,
It's a great question. I think Mitt Romney actually, I disagree with Mitt Romney on a lot of stuff. I think when he's pretty reflective and a serious guy. I think he sees what really is going on, and he understands that the country needs another justice now. I don't think his is really partisan politics. I think he feels that we need this ninth justice. He understands, I think, what's going to happen. If I can say anything, and look, people say, hey, this is Bannon with his hair on fire. I've had a pretty good record on Brexit, on the rise of populism and nationalism, on Trump. All these I was years ahead of. The pandemic, I am the single person in the West that started talking about this pandemic in mid-January and said this is a world historical event that's going to change everything, okay? I've had a pretty good track record about on big things of what they mean, and we've been talking about the seriousness of the steal the vote for the last couple of months, and it was triggered by the mass hysteria I could see in the media, which we're pretty good at covering this. They went to Raheem would say, the pathos of it, and it was really personified in the elections in New York. And then when I started looking at the polling, it said 69% are so traumatized they don't want to stand in line. That's when I realized, I said, oh my God, forget what these polls say. Donald J. Trump's going to win on game day. And they remember, they had this thing in the New Yorker, Jeffrey Toobin's piece from the other day, a senior Democratic official that said, this is not the Democratic Party of 2000. This is not a party that really believes in institutions anymore. This is a party that's changed ideologically, but is ideologically aligned. And they said, it is zero chance that anybody in this party during the month of December sits there and goes like Gordon, those guys did, hey, for the good of the country, we'll concede and we'll win it next time. He said, there's no chance that will happen. And in fact, he said, we view Trump as, he said, the country's unsustainable with another 4 years of Trump. And that the campaign of the Biden and all the progressives view Trump as an existential threat. So you see Hillary Clinton said under no circumstances concede. You see her say, don't back up an inch on allowing this new justice. And I think you've seen people like Mitt Romney and others who are no fans of Trump and don't want to do Trump any favors, understand that the country, and particularly ourselves as a republic, we're at a crossroads. And this is why your club is so important. Remember, you guys are thought leaders. You know how to take ideas and put them into action. It's now time. You got to go to the barricades here. And it's probably not going to be your highest and best use is just not going to be in New York City. You got to figure out how to weaponize yourself and make yourself most useful out there in these battleground states where we must win.
So looking back on previous election cycles, specifically the last one where you were such an integral part, you were a key component of bringing together former accusers of Bill Clinton right before the debate. Not to give away any war room strategies now, but what sort of strategies can we employ that are similar and might be of use at this moment?
You know, this is where the Southern District of New York screwed up. What they wanted to do was to somehow, they want to get everybody that could get close to Trump, and they want to get him out of there, whether it's the NRA or Jerry Falwell or Rudy Giuliani or Steve Bannon. But they missed the plot. I was never going back to the campaign. I did my duty in the 2016 campaign because that's where I was needed. I knew months ago that I had to be with outside groups doing things you can't do in the campaign and you can't do in the White House. I'm actually in some meetings tonight that I got to step back into, and others. We've got a couple of 3 tricks up our sleeve that I think are going to be, I think, haymakers to the Biden campaign and to the progressive movement. But this thing, the most important thing, is to galvanize young leaders like yourself to understand that it's just not enough to win the vote this time. It's not enough to win the vote on election day. We have to defend this republic. We're going to have to go against very sophisticated lawyers. We're going to have to face street mobs. We're going to have to figure out how to get people into the streets. And we are also going to have to stand up and take on social media. And if we do that, we'll save this Trump presidency and we'll save this republic. And so I've got a couple of 3 things that we're cooking up. We've been working on for a couple of months. I think we'll cook up that. If we can pull them off, we'll be even bigger than bringing in the women that Bill Clinton raped to the debate.
Well, Steve, we know that you have to leave us now, but we thank you for your time tonight. And we can't let you leave without inviting you to a reopened Metropolitan Republican Club once we reopen in October. So hopefully you will join us. And thank you.
Guys, look, I will do anything to support clubs like this. I love guys like you, young men and women that are on fire and dedicated and believe in this. I'm there. You let me know when it's open, and I'll come, mask on and socially distance to make sure that Mayor de Blasio is happy. But I'm honored for the habit tonight, and all I can say is learn as much as you can about this, push out the media, and get engaged. If we do that, we're going to win.
Thank you, and for everything you do for us. Thank you. Good night.
Take care.